It's funny because pizza is something you share. You know, very occasionally I've eaten a whole pizza, but usually you share it.
And whether you serve in uniform or work at a hedge fund or market maker, the life lessons in this book will serve you well.
And I think character is the essence of who we are.
Please welcome Stan McChrystal. So I want to ask Vincenzo Vicari of Mariella Pizza to come on up and introduce a little bit of your grandma's pie. Let's give Vincenzo a welcome. How long have you been doing it?
Close to 50 years.
Wow.
I moved in this country when I was 13 years old from Palermo, Sicily.
And if any one of us want to come to Mariella's for a night, what do? We just say Vincenzo asked us, or like?
Sure, definitely.
All right, thank you so much for joining us.
Okay,
Enjoy the
thank you.
pizza. I'll just ask one question of Stan before I go. They attribute to Napoleon the great phrase, "An army marches on its stomach." But whether you're at a combat outpost in Afghanistan or you're training with the Rangers, across those decades, what about that combination of dough, sauce, and cheese contributed to unit cohesion and morale in your service?
Well, it's funny because pizza is something you share. You know, very occasionally I've eaten a whole pizza, but usually you share it. And that's what makes it special. Somebody gets a pizza and they give parts of it to someone else. It's almost like those pieces come together. And so I think that's what's special about it.
I know I'm supposed to call you Stan. I'm going to try Stan, but it's strange to not call you General. The first question I have is with this equation that you describe in the book that I think is excellent, which is character equals convictions times discipline. I was intrigued by the discipline part of that, why it was a multiplier, not just an additional factor. And so maybe talk about the importance of discipline and the overall thesis of why character is so important, how discipline fits in.
At the end of the day, character is reflected in what we do. Not what we say, not what we write, not what we pretend. It's what we actually do. And sometimes I think our character surprises even ourselves. Tom Paine, the old pamphleteer, had a great quote. He says, "Reputation is what men think of us. Character is what gods and angels know of us." It's the one thing we own. Nobody can take away from us. I was trained as an engineer. I'm not a good engineer, but I was trained as one. So things are mathematical. Mathematically, anything times zero is zero. So if you lack the discipline to live to your convictions, they don't have much meaning. And sometimes that discipline could be described as courage.
How do you cultivate discipline? And you were a JSOC commander, things move very fast. In a fast-paced, high-speed, high-stakes environment, can you cultivate discipline? I think that applies to Citadel as well.
You don't start with discipline. You don't grow up automatically disciplined. But I think you learn discipline. And you learn it in a couple of ways. The first is somebody beats it into you. I still fold my underwear in my drawer at home. Everybody thinks it's ridiculous, but I learned that at West Point, and it just seems right. So I do it. Things like integrity become habits, and they become part of your discipline. The other part of discipline, though, is developing priorities of what you think matters.
Easy to be disciplined when things are going well. Your resignation in 2010 was this inflection point for you. This moment, I remember pretty vividly, and you stood up, you offered your resignation, and it was this powerful leadership moment. So I guess my question to you is, in that moment of sort of peak stress, how much of sort of character is convictions times discipline, this equation that you've come up with, how much of that was rattling around in the front of your head as you did this, or was it something that as you've reflected back, you've sort of clarified and crystallized in your mind?
Yeah, and Jay, that's a great question, because I did not spend time hand-wringing over whether I should offer my resignation or how I should act. To me, that was clear. I was the president's commander. This thing had happened on my watch, and I am responsible. Simple as that. People said, was it a hard decision? I said, no, it wasn't a hard decision. It was an easy decision, almost a reflexive decision. Now, it was a painful decision, to be sure. And I didn't think, well, what's going to make my character best? And this is where I think examples I'd had in my life and some discipline that I'd built up over time, clarity of who I thought I was, because it was not hard to figure out what I ought to be. It was just hard being it. In an instant, I'm not the commander in Afghanistan. In an instant, I'm not a four-star general. In an instant, I'm not even a soldier. And I'd been a soldier since I was 17.
So switching gears totally. You have this phrase that I actually don't know if it's in this book or another book, but it's sort of eyes on, hands off leadership. And so, a good war story, you have a lot of those. You talk about the time in Iraq. You guys are sort of targeting Zarqawi. You're looking for him, and you find him. Maybe tell us that story. Sort of his figure in Iraq, how much he loomed in Iraq for JSOC. But then once you find him, and then sort of how the tape plays out to the end.
I was commanding our counterterrorist forces for 5 years, and we had, for 2.5 years, we've been going after a guy named Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, the Jordanian-born leader of al-Qaeda in Iraq. And Zarqawi was a psychopathic murderer. There is a video you can still look at online where he stands behind a young American named Nick Berg, then leans him on his side, pulls out a big knife, and saws his head off. And when I watched that in early 2004, I told my command, we're going to kill him. I really hoped we'd capture him, but we committed ourselves to stop him and stop his organization. And that was easier said than done, because 2.5 years later, we're still in this vicious fight with him. So finally, our intelligence keeps getting better and better. We capture 12 guys one day, and as we're doing all the interrogations, we all start to figure out one guy is really important. So we start 50 days of interrogations of this guy. And you think 50 days, you may have seen some of the war movies like Zero Dark 30. We didn't do any of that stuff. We talked to him over and over to convince him. He had movie night once a week. And his favorite movie was The Exorcist. Yeah, whatever. And our interrogators became as close to him as they could. And finally, we sort of guilted him. And we said, if you don't stop this, more and more people are going to die. And so he says, I know where his spiritual advisor is, Zarqawi's. So he identifies a spiritual advisor. He says he goes to see Zarqawi about once every 10 to 12 days. So it's very difficult. We put him under surveillance. We've got guys in civilian clothes. We've got aircraft overhead. We're doing all these things to watch the spiritual advisor. And we were told that when he moves his family, the next day he will go see Zarqawi. So he moves him one day, and we're watching him like a hawk. And as he's moving, we think he's going to go west because we think that's where Zarqawi is. He doesn't. He goes north. And he's coming out of Baghdad and on a highway, and suddenly he pulls off the side of the highway, gets out of a vehicle, another vehicle pulls up right behind him. He gets in the other vehicle and drives away. He goes up to a place called Baqaba, gets out of a vehicle, goes into this corner little restaurant, then comes out another door and gets in a white pickup truck. And there were like 50 white pickup trucks there. It was almost like, this was a movie. Gets in the vehicle, but we don't lose him because we've been following him so long that we know how he walks, we know what he looks like, and we follow him. We get up to this area that was sort of like a suburb outside of Baqaba, series of houses with a big palm grove behind him, and it's late afternoon. And we're watching this guy. He pulls up in a driveway of one of these things, and as he does, a guy walks out of the house in all black, and that's how Zarqawi dressed. And I remember they grabbed me and they go, "Sir, you got to see this." And I go, "Holy smoke, that's Zarqawi." And we immediately alerted a Delta Force troop that we had ready with the helicopters. They were in Baghdad, and they were just standing by as soon as we get it, go. So I said, "Send them." Commander goes, "Got it." And then he comes back to me about 5 minutes later. He says, "One of the helicopters broke." I said, "That never happens. Not that unit. It just doesn't happen." He said, "It happened." And now it's getting later in the afternoon, and we knew if it got dark and he got in the palm grove, we wouldn't find him. He comes to me, the subordinate commander, great guy, goes, "I want to bomb him. I want to kill him." And I said, "We are not killing him. We are going to go capture him because I want to talk to him." Commander goes, "Sir, we got to kill him. We got to get him now before he gets away." I said, "You're right. It's your call. Let's do that." So we immediately called 2 F-16s, which are above, and they're going to strike. And I said, "Okay, do it." And then they come to me and said, "The jets are on a tanker. They're getting refueled. They can't do it right now." I said, "That's not possible." Get them off the tanker. And so we have this delay, and the clock's ticking. It's getting dark, and then finally the jets get off, and they do the strike.
But you delegated
Yeah.
the strike because you wanted to capture them.
Yep.
The person who worked for you
Yep.
said, no, sir, we got to drop ordnance on this
And
place.
there was even another guy, as we were all these 50 days when we're talking this detaining, and then we get to we're tracking the spiritual advisor. We've got this master sergeant intel guy, looked kind of like a bag of donuts, but he was the best guy, Southern guy, and every day we had this pressure, and I said, let's go get him now. Let's go pick up the spiritual advisor. We'll talk to him and ask him, and he goes, no, hold. And I said, we're losing people every day. We've got this incredible violence. This guy may disappear. We should go. And he goes, sir, hold. Are you not listening? And so for about 12 days, we went through that every day. And every day I just says, okay, I trust you. And then after we actually got Zarqawi, that night I flew to Baghdad and gave out one medal. There are all these people who've been doing this for months, one medal to that intelligence sergeant. Typically, you think I'm going to give a medal to the person who kicks open the door and does the dramatic thing. Usually, much of the credit belongs to people you don't think about, people who actually make it happen, the communicators, the logisticians, the intel people, because they're just or more important than anybody else.
In the book, you talk about servant leadership. We exist to serve the mission, the people that we're leading. But in this book, you sort of tie leadership to humility and service. And so I guess my question to you is, how is servant leadership sort of manifested in practice? Have you seen it in your military career? And then in an organization that is, we're good at what we do at Citadel. We're like a lot of type A people, we're hard chargers. How does that sort of manifest itself in an organization like ours as well?
When you are a young infantry officer, and I was in the light infantry and the paratroops, it is your responsibility to take care of your paratroopers' feet. So you're out in the field and it's wet and it's cold and we're doing a lot of road marching. It's your responsibility to look at them. And so you got this 19-year-old paratrooper with nasty feet, but he takes his boots off and he puts them about 2 inches from your face so you can check them, because that's your job, because those feet matter. And so if you think you're too important to do things like that, you've missed the point of what you're there for. The young lieutenant doesn't win any of the firefights. Paratroopers do that. You're along with them, you're participating, but the reality, they are the ones who get the job done. Just like as Joshua, you guys are the ones who get the job done at Citadel. It may be disproportionately credited to people in corner offices, but the reality is nothing happens without everybody. And so a servant leader, I think, is someone who understands that you are there to enable everybody in the organization to be as effective as they can be. Sometimes that means you push them hard. It doesn't mean you rub their belly and make life easy. It means you help them do their job as well as they can, and you take care of them. It's part of your responsibility. Everybody needs to be taken care of by somebody. When you get very senior in the military, everywhere you go, you're the general, and everybody stands up. If you make a joke, they laugh. People are lined up and all this kind of thing. And you can start to feel that everybody's a supporting cast to me, and I'm the star of the show. But you're not. I had a leader once tell me that when you leave, if the organization says, wow, we did it all by ourselves, you were a success.
Give us an example, like a real world example of how the character of a team, how you instill that, but how much of an impact it's had, maybe more, or equal to the tactics that the team deployed.
Oh, yeah. It's the culture or the character of the team that determines everything. The best military organization I was a part of was the U.S. Army Rangers. And when I got there, I had been in other units. I had about 10 years of service, so I'd been in Special Forces. I'd been in the paratroops and whatnot. And they go to the Rangers, and I thought they were all going to be 10 feet tall and brave and brilliant and all this kind of stuff because they had this great reputation. And I found they're just like everybody else. No advantage. All they were is they had a set of standards that everybody decided to live up to. And there was this incredible peer pressure within the organization to adhere to those standards. And so if you didn't, you got, they called release for standard, RFS, and you went away. And it was a hard life because it was a difficult unit, but there was just this feeling when you were there that I'm in the presence of people with more discipline, more commitment than I have. And so you want to live up to that. You want to be like them. You may have heard the Ranger Creed. There's a 6-stanza creed that the Rangers recite every single day at physical training. And before they jump into combat, like in Panama, in the aircraft with parachutes on, doors open, they recite the Ranger Creed again. And it's not this mindless mantra or poem. It's a promise to every other Ranger. It's got things that says, I'll keep myself mentally fit, morally straight. But then it's got a line that says, I'll never leave a fallen comrade to fall into the hands of the enemy. And you say, okay, that's a line. No. What that means is if somebody's down, a Ranger's down, even if it's in a bullet-swept street, you're going after them. You're not going to think about it. You're not going to wonder. You're going, even if they're dead, because you said you would. And you go, holy smoke, I'm committing myself to 2,000 other Rangers. And then you suddenly realize 2,000 other Rangers are making that promise to you every single day, and they've never violated it. And so it has this cumulative effect on the organization where you have this set of expectations of yourself and of the organization that gives this cohesion. It gives this, you never want to let the regiment down.
I got a question on the say-do gap, but we're going to pause here. Josh.
Where do you see us vis-a-vis the world, the commitments that we've made after World War II, and where we're going from here?
You know, we were an isolationist country in the 1920s and 1930s, and we didn't join the League of Nations because we had this idea that the rest of the world, but particularly Europe, was just a place that goes to war, and they're focused on themselves. And then with the Second World War particularly, as we became involved, we became an international power. We were a power, but we became an international power. And everybody says, wow, we're carrying an undue burden. The United States is carrying more in the world than is our share. Well, in reality, it was the best deal we could have ever gotten. Our currency became the world currency. Our culture became the envy of everyone. People wanted to partner with the United States. When I was commanding in Afghanistan, we had 46 nations in the coalition. NATO was the core of it, but many other nations came. None of them came because Afghanistan was a strategic, critical interest for their country. They came because the United States asked them to. And they came because they thought their relationship with the United States was important enough that they're willing to take the risk to do that. It's messy. You can imagine me trying to coordinate 46 nations to all agree on what we're going to do. But the reality is they were team players. And so I think that if we retreat in the world, if we come back to America first, I mean, every country's their own country first. You're going to look after your country. But if we retreat mentally or in a narrative to tell other countries they don't matter, they'll find other friends. They have to. And so I'm a great believer that what we should be doing is trying to build the best relations we can. We'll have disagreements. We should be as intertwined as possible. And in today's world, no single military is going to be able to provide real security. We don't have enough force to do that, never will. And so that's why I think it's so critical that we think that way.
Let's pause there. I think we see a question back there.
So there have been plenty of leaders in the past with very strong convictions and combined sometimes with very strong discipline leading to very bad outcomes. So how do you qualify for yourself on what should be the convictions to really invest in?
That's the question, sort of, is there good character and bad character? And it goes to, if the convictions are flawed, but you are very disciplined, then you can do a lot of negative things. But the one thing I think you have to do is, before you judge anybody's convictions as wrong, step back and say, if I had had their life journey, how would I view the situation? Because what I found in places like Iraq, we have the Al-Qaeda fighters who were incredibly difficult to deal with. But they were brave, they were committed, they were willing to sacrifice. And in many ways, they were very close to the best people I had. They just had a different life journey to get there.
Yeah.
On the U.S. exit from Afghanistan, having spent so much time there, things that you maybe would have liked to see done differently, or any insights you could provide on that?
I would have liked us to leave a residual force. I think we could have left 2,500 people and would have increased the confidence of the Afghans, because that's what they lacked. They had forces, they had plenty to secure the country, but they lacked the confidence. Most Americans wanted to get out of the forever war. So there was a political push to get out. Now, the actual pullout, they worked 3 options: fast, medium, and slow. Fast allows you to get out really quickly, less danger to your force, because the enemy can't respond. But it's going to leave the Afghans thinking, whoa. Slow draws it out. And really, the Taliban weren't going to attack us. They had no reason to, but ISI, or ISIS, was. They were, and Al-Qaeda, what's left of it, they were very interested in doing it. So the idea, if you're slow, you're vulnerable longer. And then there's a question of how do you get your Afghan allies out? If you start taking them out early, then the government of Afghanistan gets upset because it looks like you're obviously deserting them and you're taking great people. So there were a lot of things. But at the end of the day, I don't think we got it right.
I was deployed, actually, when we pulled out of Kabul, and I was in the Middle East. I was the J2 for a task force there that's like flexed to Afghanistan. One of the takeaways, at least from my perspective, and I'm curious how you would sort of think about this as the commander, is it did not seem like starting in May of that year, intelligence or sort of assessments from the ground were making its way up to the joint staff so they could actually brief the president. Because the decision to get out, everything you said is 100% accurate, except there was like some fuzziness at what's the deadline? Is it September 11th? Is it August 15th? Whatever it is. So as a four-star who's led huge organizations, how do you ensure that you're getting real-time assessments from the people on the ground who are seeing it with their own 2 eyes? Because anyone who was there knew in May this was a bad situation and the country was going to fall quickly.
This is much harder than it seems. You think if you're a senior officer, you just say, okay, tell me what's happening. There are a lot of things that happen to information as it comes up. Unintentionally, it gets corrupted. People put their own spin on it. People think, well, what does the general or the president want to hear? There's just this set of things so that by the time it gets up, it's still murky, but it's often lacking many of the perspectives that you really want to have there. And that's why it's so important for senior leaders to get out and talk to people around just to get a sense of it. They can't talk to everybody, but get a sense of what's really happening. When I was in Afghanistan, we had intelligence would come up and it'd be tiered. The most sensitive, top secret, special compartment, and intelligence comes in a book, and then there's top secret, then there's secret. And you come in and it's your tendency to open up the most secret because that's the sexiest, et cetera. It's typically absolute BS. Leaders have got to become good consumers of intelligence.
Dylan.
Next year, 250th anniversary, July 4th. A lot of our colleagues here at Citadel might not be going into public service, but as you're looking at the anniversary as a sort of launching point for thinking about these issues, how can we be thinking about service in our families, our communities, the country?
Yeah, Dylan, thanks for asking that, because I'm involved in a couple of organizations trying to push this. Start number one, vote. 65% of qualified American voters voted in the last presidential election, less than the rate in Afghanistan. To me, that's not as representative as we are capable of having. So first, vote. The second thing is, how do we engage? How do we talk about it? You know, if we go into our little group, the group that thinks like us and is from the same zip code or works in the same firm, we're going to have a pretty narrow view of things. We're also not going to communicate what we think effectively to other people. I would say don't get on social media and tell people what you think when you're anonymous and people are less mature on average on social media. Get involved. You know, get involved in one party or another, or get involved in an independent movement. Get involved in just something that brings people into participation. And don't just stay on the sideline. We got to interact.
So let me end here. We're coming to the end of our time. It's a real privilege to work at Citadel. You're in a room full of people who are going to be leaders. You spent the greater part of your military career cultivating leadership. You've taught leadership at Yale. So to a room full of leaders who are here to sort of pick the brain of a master, what would be your parting advice to us on how to serve, how to be good leaders, how to be people of character?
Yeah, I'll start with a sort of an easy tagline. It says, be the follower that you'd want to have working for you as a leader. Because that's the first step. Then be the leader that you'd want to have if you were a follower. Now, the thing about leadership, if people always ask me, what's the most important trait? And at one point I used to say empathy, and that's not sympathy, but empathy is the ability to get on the other side and see it how another person might see it. Open your mind enough to go, well, that's a rational point, even if you don't disagree with it. But I don't think that anymore. I think the most important thing is self-discipline. Most of us know how to be good leaders. If I gave everybody a piece of paper and said, give me the top 10 behaviors of good leaders, our lists would be remarkably similar. The difference is where we don't do what we know we should do. Whether it's inconvenient, or it's frightening, or it's awkward, or it's any number of other things, we depart from that. So I would say if you want to be a good leader, go back to what you know a good leader is, and then challenge yourself to have the discipline to do it. And nobody's going to be perfect. You are going to make mistakes, big ones. And sometimes you are going to make things that you just go, oh my God, how could I do that? Don't let that be the new standard. The standard is what you know it should be. And just say, okay, yesterday I lost my temper, I acted a fool. I won't do that today. You know, I'm 71. I still every day get it wrong a bunch of times. But what I try to do is never let that be who I am. Who I am is who I think I really ought to be.
Sir, it's been a privilege to have you here. Thank you so much for making some time. Everyone have a good night. Some say hi to the
Thanks,
gentleman.
everybody.
Thank you. Great. I appreciate it.